Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spent. Take another look and take some time for hemp. Don't cut trees for paper, cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. An acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent. Well, it's time for
Can you guys hear me?
Thank you for taking time for hemp. Yes, we can. I'm your host, Casper Leitch. You are listening to the live broadcast of Time for Hemp all around the world on AmericanFreedomRadio.com, AM, FM stations all across America, and on the Roku network. I want to give a big shout out to all of my friends up in Canada and say thank you to KDK Distributors for being nice enough to give us a grant to keep us loud, proud, and strong, and also a big thank you to Head Shop Canada for being nice enough to also do the same. We had planned on kicking off a big special tomorrow, but we're kind of starting it today. Do want to remind people that tomorrow we will be getting an hour earlier in the day. We normally start at 10 a.m. Tomorrow we will be on from 9 a.m. Pacific Standard to 11 a.m. Pacific Standard. The Time for Hemp Global Summit begins tomorrow morning with a great list of panelists and moderators. But today we are lucky enough to what I call have a moderator and a keynote speaker on the program. Moderated today by Paul Stanford, and the keynote speaker is Todd McCormick. And Todd, I tell you, I want to thank you for being nice enough to take a few moments and join us here on the big broadcast.
It's my pleasure, Casper. Thank you for spending so much time on such an important subject.
And Paul, I want to thank you for being nice enough to also every Thursday be part of our family here on the big broadcast.
You're welcome, Casper. Thank you.
And today's topic we're kicking off is the evolution of cannabis in Europe and the cultural impact that it's had. And Todd, you and Paul both have a tremendous amount of input on that topic, and I thought we might open up with you.
Well, Paul and I have both been studying hemp for a very long time. We were both fortunate enough to be very close to Jack Herer and work on his seminal book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, with him. And when researching that book, it became really obvious to me that when you think back to, say, Columbus's time, when he discovered the New World, this was 300 years before the invention of the cotton gin. This was almost 400 years before the invention of this synthetic, like nylon, that we would go on to replace the cotton with. And when you think back to where Columbus was in 1492, much of his ship and much of everything around him, the clothing he wore, the paper he used, the ropes, the riggings, the paints, the varnishes, only came from the cannabis plant. And when you think about that, the cultural evolution of Europe is and was greatly dependent on their application of cannabis industrially. And I was asked a question yesterday, what I thought was the biggest, basically, and best breakthrough for cannabis. And I had to say it was cannabis sativa L, because when the Indo-Europeans and the Asians started using cannabis as a textile, that's when human evolution really took off. You think, Paul?
Yeah, I of course agree. You go back to prehistoric civilizations in Central Asia, and you see that cannabis is cultivated thousands of years prior to the written word. And then you look at the first text in China, in present-day India, and they both talked about hemp as being the most important crop. So it goes back, as we know, at least 12,000 years, and maybe more than 25,000 years that cannabis has been cultivated by human beings. And, you can just look at a wolf and then look at a Chihuahua or a Rottweiler and know that we've changed that species a great deal over the past 7,000 years. So cannabis and humans have co-evolved just like that, each to meet each other's needs. And so our nutritional requirements perfectly match the amino acid profile and the essential fatty acid profile of hemp seed. And of course, cannabis flowers have THC and other chemicals that mimic brain and nervous system neurotransmitters. So we've co-evolved for a long time, perhaps longer than any other two species. So we have this symbiotic relationship that continues to this day. And it's a shame that, certain economic forces starting about 100 years ago started to spread a lot of misinformation about it. I have a large collection of cannabis antique medical marijuana containers. And what amazes me is that a lot of them, starting about 100 years ago, were marked poison. So I just wonder why, and cannabis has no lethal dose. You can take as much as you can possibly take and you're not going to die. So I just wonder why it was labeled poison 100 years ago. What do you think, Todd?
Well, I think that in the way that they use the term might be a little bit different from the way we use the term now, whereas in a sense poison was more of a toxin, and they would put it on things that were just anything that could hurt your skin, hurt your in any way. Now I think of it at the highest degree of the definition of the word, like, you can kill somebody, but I think it was more like of something that could toxify or if you used in a concentrated manner, something you should be concerned about. When we launched the museum in Barcelona, for those people listening, there is a new Barcelona museum that is dedicated to cannabis culture and hemp history. And when we launched that, Ben Dronkers, the gentleman at the museum, has a vast collection of medicinal bottles. And when you look back, I think that their use of the word poison was almost like a disclaimer, like their way of the little legal fine print. It's like, oh yeah, and by the way, there's the list of things that could happen. And I, like you, Paul, don't really see the toxicity of cannabis really that makes sense per se why they would put poison on something that's not poisonous. But I think it could have just been the companies back in the time trying to cover themselves.
Yeah, that could be it. That could be it for sure.
It's interesting in the news today. There's the news literally today is that hemp is used in over 25,000 products now, including the new BMW, the electric BMW that is getting all the news today and yesterday, has hemp in it, as does actually all the BMWs, Jaguars, Mercedes, even the Bugatti has hemp in it grown in northern Holland by the same gentleman, Ben Dronkers, that owns the hemp and marijuana museums located in both Barcelona and Amsterdam. And it's pretty amazing how he has been able to get hemp back into the commodities around him in Europe, because when the companies are looking for environmental alternatives to some of the products that they're already consuming, they are compelled under European environmental law to use products like hemp. And it's great to see these companies starting to embrace it. So now all of the more expensive lines of Mercedes and BMW, the 7 Series, the 5 Series, all the S Series, SLs have hemp in them. And it's an amazing what when you look at it, 20 years ago, none of those companies were using hemp. And I've been pressuring Ben to say, this is what has to happen in North America, because the farmers in America are being ripped off. 100 years ago, special interests came in after World War II and reorganized the way that the government did business. Everybody listening should take the time to watch a wonderful documentary called Why We Fight, because after World War II, the armament division of the military-industrial complex went crazy and basically took over our government. They waged wars all over the world, and they reorganized the way we were allowed as consumers to basically live. Because farmers, when you think about this, who had for generations since the basically the moving of westward from the people that came here originally. As we went west, we planted hemp. All of our covered wagons were made out of canvas. When you have canvas, it was from cannabis, so all of this wild hemp growing in places like Nebraska is from the settlers. And when you look at the fact that now these same farmers are not even allowed to process the hemp growing on their property, it's a little ridiculous, because what's happened is all of these big businesses after World War II came up with the synthetic solutions to hemp, helped to keep hemp outlawed, and have kept farmers basically in a stranglehold. And
I often say that, you know, marijuana prohibition is really about fuel, fiber, money, power, and the continued centralization of economic and political control. They just made up this whole marijuana myth to, you know, have the economic markets concentrate on petrochemical alternatives and synthetic alternatives and things that are capital intensive. So most of us can't play that game. You know, it takes tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to drill for petroleum. It takes tens of billions of dollars to process it into fuel and other products. But you can get 300 gallons of diesel fuel from an acre of hemp with the residual 30 tons of fiber and 3 tons of food. And you just take that hemp seed oil, pour it right into your diesel engine, turn the key, and you can drive around.
Back in 1916, the USDA put out Bulletin 404, which Paul is very familiar with. And what they tried to emphasize is that in order to get the same amount of paper out of trees, the same amount of paper that would grow in 1 acre of hemp in 1 year's time would take 4 years of Douglas fir trees growing perpetually for 20 years to make the same amount of paper that farmers could get off of 1 acre of hemp grown in under a year. And this is when you start looking at the economic viability of hemp, you can see why I say, and Paul says, that in a sense, farmers are being ripped off right now. I mean, I love Willie Nelson. He's been a big advocate for the cause. But those guys can have as many farm aids as they want. But until they realize that it's about hemp, that those farms were built on hemp, and they weren't built on, you know, cotton. I mean, cotton didn't come along for 300 years after we started settling this country. There wasn't a patent on a cotton gin until the 1790s. Yet slavery started in 1619 in Jamestown, Virginia, along with the passing of laws that said that farmers had to grow at least 10% of their land as hemp. Because what a lot of your listeners might not realize is that when Columbus arrived in this country, what he found was tobacco. What he expected to find and couldn't find was growing all over Europe and with cannabis hemp. And without it, he couldn't mend his sails, he couldn't mend his ropes, he couldn't repaint his boat, he couldn't get home. So sailors back 300-400 years ago had to set sail with barrels full of hemp seeds, because if they happened to crash somewhere that didn't have hemp, that was their main ingredient. That was their source material that they would be able to grow, be able to process, and fix their ships with. Without it, they were shipped out of luck, is basically what they were. And when these people landed in North America, what they immediately started doing was trying to plant hemp so that they could get independent of Europe. Because without hemp, we had to take all of our drug money, which was our tobacco money. We had to buy all of our blankets and our beddings and our everything cloth, everything paper, all of the ship sails, all of the ropes. We had to buy it back from Europe, which kept our country broke. So why our forefathers demanded that we grow hemp is so that we could keep that economy here. So we need it now in the 21st century as much as we needed it back in the 14, 15, 1600s.
Yeah, it's really a matter of social and economic justice because, you know, we don't need to give all of our money to the petrochemical companies. We can give it to our farmers. Instead of petrochemical companies stashing it away in their Swiss bank accounts or investing in tar sands in Saskatchewan or molybdenum.
I would like to point this out. Anybody can go online and look at photographs of Dubai 20 years ago. It was a desert, okay? You go back to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, before, you know, the pot of oil and Bush 1 started drilling there, and it was a desert. And all of the money that we have put into the petrochemical industry could have been spread out all over North America had one simple decision been made, and that was to allow the patent from Rudolph Diesel, which developed the diesel engine to run on vegetable-based oil. His concept with the diesel engine was to fit it into the ecosystem. He believed that he could create a machine that would run off of the vegetable oils created by the plants that grew from the soil it plowed. So it fit right in. But when we started fueling our machines with these dead dinosaurs, the Saudis got rich, the Saudi Arabia got rich, Dubai grew like a weed, but our farmers went broke. And the reality is this isn't an accident. This was corporate manipulation with our capitalistic economy, allowing our farmers to go broke. Because realistically, I think the government's enjoying taking their land. I think the government didn't like homesteading in some ways, and now they're going back there. They've created an economy that the farmers cannot compete in. And now when they can't pay their taxes, and they're not the ones getting rich like the guys in Dubai with the little cap on the oil well, well, they're losing their land back to the government, who's then selling it to mega corporations and parceling it out. And I think it's a manipulation of again, the capitalist system. The same government that said, go west and multiply, and you build a fence, you can keep the land, is now coming in and saying, sorry, we're going to create an economic situation you can't compete in, and if you don't like that, too bad, we want the land back. And I think American farmers should really start looking at this more realistically and being angry, because, like I keep saying, hemp aid can be up there on stage with all the celebrity endorsements they want, but until they start telling the truth, until they start focusing on the fact that these farms were not built on the commodities they're allowed to grow right now, that they were built on the canvas-covered wagons that went west, they were built on the rope walks of Boston, they were built on the sail manufacturing that went on everywhere, all around the country as we tried to build our nation. That's what these farms were really built on. And realistically, this is what we need now. We need to be independent of these oil sources from Saudi Arabia. We need to see places like Saudi Arabia go back.
I got to jump in here right now, because what I need right now is to take a commercial break so we can pay our bills. Reminder that tomorrow the 2-hour broadcast is commercial free, but today that is not the case. We will be having a groovy little tune about how wonderful marijuana is, and then come back and pick up where we've left off here at Time for Hemp.